The fence wasn't new. That was the first thing people got wrong. It had been there longer than the HOA itself. Old posts, reinforced wire, clearly inside my property line. It wasn't decorative, and it wasn't meant to be friendly. It marked a boundary that had never been disputed until the HOA president decided boundaries were optional. The first time she climbed it, I didn't even know. A neighbor mentioned it casually. "She hops your fence sometimes," he said, like he was talking about a shortcut across grass. I laughed. I thought he was exaggerating. Then I checked the camera. There she was. Mid-morning. Clipboard under one arm. One foot on the lower rail, the other swinging over like she owned the place. No hesitation. No pause to look for permission. Just entitlement in motion. She dropped onto my side, glanced around, and started taking photos. Of what? I couldn't tell. The shed? The yard? Something she'd already decided was a violation? I sent a polite email that afternoon.
Short, calm, documented.
Please do not enter my property without permission. The fence marks a private boundary. She replied within minutes. HOA officers are permitted to inspect common adjacent areas. That was false. I corrected her. Cited the bylaws. Included the survey. Attached the clause that explicitly prohibited entry onto private land without written notice or consent. Her response was a single sentence. "We'll see." The second time I was home, I heard the metallic scrape before I saw her. The sound of someone who assumes resistance is temporary. I stepped onto the porch just as she swung her leg over. "Can I help you?" I asked. She froze halfway down. "Oh," she said, startled. "I didn't realize you were here." "I live here," I replied. She smiled, the kind that's meant to end conversations. "This will just take a moment. Get off my fence." She didn't. Instead, she climbed down fully, clipboard already up, pen moving. "You have an unapproved structure near the property line. You're trespassing," I said. She finally looked at me then. Really looked. And something in her expression hardened. "You can't obstruct HOA duties," she said. That was the moment I understood the problem. This wasn't about rules. It was about access. She believed the fence was a suggestion. That my land was functionally hers if she declared it so. And worse, she believed I wouldn't do anything about it. I told her, clearly once more, to leave. She sighed, dramatically, like I was inconveniencing her. "I'll note your non-cooperation," she said, already turning back toward the fence. That night I reviewed the law. Not HOA rules. Actual law. I didn't need escalation. I needed clarity. Boundaries that didn't rely on politeness or interpretation. Something that communicated the message she'd refused to hear in writing, in conversation, and in person. The fence was legal. Improving it was legal. And the solution I chose didn't involve confrontation, threats, or shouting. Just compliance. The kind that comes with warning signs, proper permits, and consequences that don't require an argument. Because some people don't respect fences. They only respect what happens when they cross them. I didn't act out of anger. That's the part people always assume, but anger makes mistakes, and I wasn't interested in giving her anything she could twist against me. I acted out of certainty. The kind that comes after you've read the statutes twice, cross-checked the municipal code, and spoken to someone who knows how these things actually work. Electric fencing wasn't illegal. Not on private property. Not with proper signage. Not when installed to code. And most importantly, not when it was clearly meant as a deterrent, not a trap. I called a licensed installer the next morning. When he arrived, he walked the perimeter slowly, nodding to himself. "You've got repeated trespass?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Documented. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "This'll do it," he said. "People don't climb twice." We discussed voltage, grounding, spacing. He explained, very carefully, that electric fences don't work the way movies suggest. High voltage, yes. But extremely low amperage. Painful. Startling. Not dangerous, when installed correctly. I made sure it was installed correctly. 10,000 volts sounds dramatic. It always does. But it's the standard pulse used for livestock fencing all over the country. Legal. Regulated. tested, and backed by decades of case law that says, if you ignore the warnings, the responsibility is yours. The warning signs went up first. Bright yellow. Impossible to miss. Every 10 feet. Warning, electric fence, do not touch. Then came the fence itself. Reinforced wire. Clean lines. No gaps. No ambiguity. The installer tested it twice. Once for function. Once for documentation. Anyone who touches this after today, he said, handing me the report, made a choice. That afternoon, I sent one more email. Shorter than the first. For safety reasons, the fence has been upgraded. Please do not attempt to cross it. No accusations. No threats. No emotion. She didn't reply. 3 days passed. Then 4. I almost thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The camera notification came through at 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Motion detected. Front boundary. I opened the feed. There she was again. Same clipboard. Same posture. Same certainty that the rules bent around her. She stopped at the fence this time. Read the sign. Looked down the line. Looked around as if checking for witnesses. Then she sighed. And started climbing anyway. That was the moment the story stopped being about rules and started being about consequences. She didn't rush it. That's what stuck with me most when I replayed the footage later. There was no slip. No accident. She made a deliberate decision. Hands on the top wire. Foot searching for leverage. Clipboard tucked under her arm like always. She had read the sign. She chose to ignore it. The moment her hand made contact, her body reacted before her pride could. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just instantly. A sharp recoil, like touching a hot stove you knew was hot but tested anyway. She yelped, more surprised than hurt, and stumbled backward onto her side of the fence. The clipboard hit the ground. Papers scattered. She stood there for a second, breathing hard, staring at the wire like it had betrayed her personally. Then she did something I didn't expect. She touched it again. This time with the back of her hand. Like she thought the first one didn't count.
It did.
She jumped back again, visibly rattled now. Her confidence, the thing she'd worn like armor, cracked. She looked around, suddenly aware of the street, the houses, the possibility that someone might be watching. I didn't step outside. I didn't say a word. I just let the fence do what it was legally installed to do. She gathered her papers, slower now, movements stiff. She didn't look at the camera, didn't look toward the house. She walked back to her car and sat there for a full minute before driving away. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the non-emergency police line. The officer was polite, neutral, curious. Sir, we received a call regarding an electric fence, he said. No injuries reported. We just need to verify compliance. I expected that, I replied. The installation is permitted and documented. He asked a few standard questions. Voltage rating, signage, installer credentials. I emailed everything while we were on the call. There was a pause as he reviewed it. Everything appears in order, he said. Was there an attempted trespass? Yes, I said. Multiple. Documented. Another pause. Longer this time. Understood, he said. We'll note that. That was it. No citation. No warning. No follow-up. The fence wasn't the problem. Later that evening, an email from the HOA arrived. Subject line, safety concern. The message was careful. They claimed one of their officers had experienced an unexpected interaction with a recently modified boundary feature. They asked, politely now, whether I would be willing to temporarily deactivate the fence during inspections. I replied once. There will be no inspections on my property without written notice and consent. The fence will remain active. I attached the police confirmation for good measure. They didn't respond. Over the next week, something subtle happened. The violation notices stopped. The drive-bys stopped. The HOA president stopped walking near my fence entirely, choosing instead to cross the street and stay on the sidewalk like everyone else. The fence hadn't hurt her, but it had done something far more effective. It had removed the ambiguity she relied on. She could no longer pretend she didn't know where the boundary was. She could no longer claim confusion. And she definitely couldn't argue that she'd been invited. The situation was suddenly very clear. Crossing the fence was a choice. And now, so was respecting it. The shock wasn't the electricity. It was the realization that authority doesn't come from confidence. It comes from staying on the right side of the line. The HOA didn't admit fault. They never do. Instead, they reframed the entire situation as a miscommunication. That word showed up 3 times in the next email blast sent to the neighborhood. Miscommunication about boundaries. Miscommunication about access. Miscommunication about safety expectations. No mention of trespassing. No mention of warning signs. And definitely no mention of why their president had ignored both. What they did include was a new policy memo. All inspections, it said, would now require advance notice. All interactions with homeowners would remain strictly non-confrontational. And most interestingly, board members were reminded to avoid physical contact with private boundary structures. That line wasn't there by accident. Behind the scenes, the tone had shifted even more dramatically. A board member I'd never spoken to before emailed me directly. Very formal, very cautious. He asked if I'd be willing to discuss a mutually agreeable inspection process going forward. I declined. Not aggressively. Not dismissively. Just clearly. There is no inspection process for my property, I wrote. The fence marks the boundary. Please respect it. That was the end of that conversation. The HOA president, meanwhile, vanished. Not literally, but functionally. She stopped attending community events. Her name stopped appearing at the bottom of enforcement notices. When residents asked questions at meetings, someone else answered them. Leadership had changed without an announcement. That's how quiet reversals happen. I later learned, through a neighbor who enjoyed gossip more than discretion, that she'd been advised by the association's attorney to limit personal exposure. Apparently, installing an electric fence within code had forced them to confront something uncomfortable. They had no leverage. Worse, they'd created liability for themselves. Because the moment she touched that fence, after clear warnings, after documented notice, after repeated trespass, the narrative flipped. She wasn't enforcing rules anymore. She was ignoring them. And insurers cared deeply about that distinction. The HOA's insurance carrier requested documentation. The installer's report. The signage photos. The police call summary. Everything. I sent it all. 2 weeks later, another update went out to the community. This one addressed risk management improvements and announced mandatory training for board members on property boundaries and resident rights. No names. No stories. Just consequences. From then on, enforcement became paperwork only. Notices were mailed instead of photographed. Violations cited actual clauses instead of vague authority. And appeals, once ignored, were suddenly acknowledged within days. The fence stayed active. No one went near it. Sometimes I'd see the HOA president driving past, slowing just slightly as she approached the property line. She never looked directly at the fence. Never acknowledged it. But she never crossed it again. That's the thing about clear boundaries. Once they're enforced, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with preparation, they don't need to be defended twice. The HOA didn't lose power that day. They learned where it ended. And once that line becomes visible to lawyers, insurers, and everyone watching, it doesn't move back. No matter how confidently someone once stepped over it. Life didn't change overnight. It softened. The kind of quiet that settles in when tension leaves a place, not dramatically, but completely. The camera alert stopped. The email stopped. Even the passive-aggressive newsletters lost their edge, reduced to reminders about trash pickup and lawn height. Normal things. The fence stayed where it was. Active.
Marked.
Unquestioned. No one ever tested it again. Months later, I saw the HOA president at a grocery store across town. She noticed me at the same time I noticed her. There was a flicker of recognition, then avoidance. She turned down a different aisle without a word. That told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't been hurt. She hadn't been humiliated. She'd been corrected. And that's far harder to shake. The HOA eventually updated its bylaws. Quietly, buried in a packet no one reads unless they're looking for something specific. The new language was careful, lawyered, unmistakable. Board members shall not enter private property without written consent. That sentence didn't exist before. Now it does. No one ever apologized. I didn't expect them to. Accountability rarely arrives with ceremony. Most of the time, it just shows up as changed behavior. And that was enough. People often ask if I felt bad about installing the fence, about the voltage, about the shock. I don't, because nothing about it was reckless. Nothing about it was retaliatory. It was measured, permitted, and documented, installed only after every other reasonable option had been ignored. The fence didn't punish anyone. It clarified reality. Some people believe authority is something you carry with you. A title, a clipboard, a confident walk across someone else's land. But real authority ends at the boundary of the law. And when you mark that boundary clearly enough, when you make it impossible to pretend it isn't there, you don't need to argue anymore. You don't need to shout. You don't need to threaten. You don't even need to be present. The line holds on its own. The HOA learned that lesson the hard way. I got my privacy back. And the fence, quiet, humming, unmistakable, still does exactly what it was designed to do. It keeps everyone on the right side of the line.